Now we're going to continue down the path of social science, but this time we're going to take a look at, I keep walking over to this like I'm going to play it. I'm sorry. Let me move over here. I'll spare you that. So now we're going to move on to the topic of behavioral cues and sort of how this idea of shifting from impressions to expressions becomes really important, not just in how human beings engage with one another, but also how your brand engages with customers. Because I think one thing we're learning here is that, aside from emotion, businesses are becoming incredibly human, and they're developing personas, whether you know it or not, or whether you're developing or not. So let's get started with Kare Anderson. Kare is actually a columnist for HuffPo and also Forbes. Kare, welcome. Thank you. Have a seat right here. And I will, right here, and I'll sit over here too. Thank you for bringing her out with a warm welcome. Well, I got to tell you that one of the things that I love is the opportunity to spend time backstage to kind of get in the zone. And I find myself, as I was mentioning to Kare, that I was geeking out for a moment, like, this is so cool. So I started with this whole idea of, basically what you said, is that the idea of people having these hidden cues that they don't necessarily know they're giving off, but at the same time, they're being read, and maybe we don't necessarily understand that we're reading these things as we form impressions. We've talked a lot about online. This whole conference is sort of about the future of digital, but I got to imagine that in the real world, there's much to learn, and there's much that we can take from that to bring it back online. So why don't we start with a little story that I just have to share real quick. How many of you in the audience saw that iPhone 5 segment on Saturday Night Live this last weekend? It's so funny because I smack things all the time, and I wish I had an app for that. But what do you call that? You call that the screen face?
Yes.
So kind of just give us an overview of society and what's happening to us with the screen face.
The research shows that we're getting more flat-faced affect, which means we don't change expression a lot. That's why preemie babies in the Stanford Hospital do much better with Hispanic women 50 and older holding them, because they've got warmth, fluidity in the arms. They have a range of gestures. Screen face means that your face can look pissed in repose, or worse. And so we change over radically to social. So I was going to try something, Brian. Could you please look at the more normal of the two people on either side of you and ask that person to be your partner? Some of you aren't looking either way. So what just happened, regardless, and this is the end of it, is you put on your warm face, you were startled, and you look nicer to each other. You tend to like each other more. And because you like each other more, then you tend to like us more now.
Oh, can you guys do that again? It's like the double up, please. Well, that's an interesting thing, though. I guess that's why they call it icebreakers, is sort of get people looking at one another differently and sort of bring up a mood of collaboration and communication rather than one of sort of tense standoffishness. But how does that sort of apply to the world of digital?
Well, since everything's turning video, I think the warmth we bring to it, for example, even if it's only an audio piece or you're even texting, to the degree you're smiling and you're loose and warmer, that does come through, whether it's video, audio, or even in print. So that old research about if you smile, you feel better, the other person does, it pays off. But it's also how we tighten up, shoulder up. Those cues affect us and others. It is very contagious to the third degree, as James Fowler and other people suggested.
There's an idea, though, that as engagement becomes sort of paramount in the future of, say, business, right? And relationships, we throw that word around, like to the point where I hope it doesn't lose its meaning or its value or its intention. But really what we're talking about is these hidden cues and sort of how you conduct yourself in terms of mannerisms, whether it's in the real world or online, is actually the foundation of which those relationships are ultimately built.
Yes, absolutely. That's very well put. And I'm up here in front of everybody. Has anybody read the book Quiet by Susan Cain? It's about introversion. It's brilliantly written. I grew up a daydreamer and quiet. So this is, being a speaker and being a journalist is odd. And it's not like you want a glad hand. And a bright grin is sometimes extremely irritating to people. So it's the warmth of your whole being.
Right.
And you can change your face. If you haven't read Dr. Paul Ekman's stuff on the 7 universally expressed emotions, and to be more aware of your face in repose, I think that's the best start.
Is that something that's learned, or is that sort of just inherent in who you are? Or is it a product of society or culture?
It can be adjusted. That's the dramatic thing. And in fact, I'm working with 3 people, work with trauma people, soldiers coming back, and traumatized children. And one of the easiest things to do is if there's warmth in the people that surround them while they're doing some of their activity, they actually feel the warmth and they start imitating it because we're essentially imitative characters. And that reduces their trauma rather than addressing it directly. So in fact, there's a big controversy now about whether you should talk through your trauma to get rid of it, or does it embed it more in the brain? But either way, when you're surrounded by people who look warm in a way that's believable to you, so in other words, different cultures looking directly at someone is offensive after a while. So it's warm and congruent for what they recognize as seeming safe, warm, and congruent.
Is this something that is, let's take an idea of online community, for example, and many times, we'll just use a basic example, social marketers will develop a community, hope to grow that community, measure the size of that community based on the numbers or the interactions within the community. Therefore, they're sort of motivated to create an editorial calendar or program to sort of incite more activity. But really, I don't hear in any of that type of activity this idea of then what are those behavioral cues that the people moderating or hosting the community are trying to sort of convey or instill in the community. Is that something that you think needs to be considered in this type of engagement, especially for social marketing?
I do, both in person and online. We've talked about high Q. For those of you that know that from TV, some people innately have high Q, like Mike Rowe. It's distinct, and the way you test it is people's vital signs are tested as they're watching people. They're told they're watching for other things. But certain people, you just warm up the hippocampus, and they could sell asparagus. I don't know why I said asparagus, but and then there's others that aren't. But the other part that I like is the contrast of people. If you have one really warm, outgoing person naturally, and one that's not, the introverted, low affect person can actually do the close, ask more direct questions. The other person can warm it up. So part of camaraderie is the playoff in social media and in real life between people that look and act much different but are clearly convivial.
Well, there's a saying that I have that the best conversationalists are the best listeners.
Yes.
And I think in any form, whether it's online or in the real world, I think we tend to use the word listening half-heartedly. I think we use the word listening to see what people are saying, or see what people are expressing, or word of mouth, and how we compete against other brands. But I actually do believe that listening has a lot more to do with hearing. And one of the most interesting things about hearing is something that you said earlier in our discussion, was something along the lines of proving to people that you heard them or that they were heard. And why is that important?
More people are living and working alone. More people look at screens. They don't have interactions. There's less physical touch. There's less direct gaze. So the idea of asking a question and listening and asking a follow-up question is important. But there's also a cue I called the power of the third question. People are far more revealing by the questions they ask than the answers they give. So if someone asks you a question and you answer briefly and appropriately, they'll ask a follow-up to learn more. And then they'll ask another follow-up. And the power of 3, the third question, you are more likely to figure out what's really bothering them or exciting them. Because what we operate on is what we're most afraid of or we most like.
Right.
So Brian doesn't know I was going to say this part, but the reason how I first met him and was inspired to come here was up on a rooftop party. And we were introduced to people, and it was one of the most powerfully thoughtful listening conversations I'd had in months. He asked such good sequential questions, had a conversational thread. Are you blushing yet?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time hearing this.
And clearly was making me the center of the conversation. And it makes a glow come to us. And I believe that happens, you can set that conversational thread up online as well.
Well, I totally just forgot what I was going to say. It threw me off there, but thank you.
Well, it's true. That's true.
That actually reminds me of something that I don't know who said it, so hopefully you do. Otherwise, it still sounds neat. Is that idea that most people have a conversation without the true intention of actually listening, that people are ready to respond before you're even done saying something. So, I mean, how does that factor into this? Are we evolving because of everything that's taking place around us so fast that we're losing that art or that capability?
Well, there's an MIT and a Stanford study that show we tend to listen less than we're preparing. And again, it's by tracking brains. But the good notion is, I mean, there's a person right here who I met on a Twitter chat, and his responses are so specific and good. He clearly was listening, and we weren't even in person. So to flip it on the other side, a profoundly deep listener who proves they heard something tells other people this is specifically what happened. Like the gentleman from the New York Times, what a stunning summary he did in such clarity and specificity and honoring the people by name as he was bringing them up. That was a great example of deep listening, curating, and handing the glory back to those people.
Right. That was actually well done, because I think when people do feel that they're heard, it's empowering. I think it's also validating. But I think now what we're starting to talk about are the hooks of relationships where people actually can form trust, people can form loyalty, and I think we take these miscues often where we don't necessarily hear what people are saying, yet we think we do. So then we start looking at different types of metrics to prove that we're doing our job the right way. And not that there's anything wrong with people getting creative in terms of metrics, but I think that there are good old-fashioned metrics that we can employ into this. And I want to take it to a level where a lot of the individuals here who have to go back to brands to say, look, I heard some really interesting things from Kare, and one of the things was something that you had said, and I want to share it with the folks here, is that the body is a billboard. And you take the idea that a body is a billboard, unless you're thinking about John Mayer, and then a body is a wonderland.
Where did that come from?
Shifting gears. But if you think about the body as a billboard and then a brand as a persona, that's where I start to make the correlations now of everything that you're saying, because there's offline and online realities now, and that relationships are important on both sides. Mm-hmm. But if we have all of these hidden cues of what we do in the real world, that we're not even paying attention to these things, we don't even realize that we're doing this, I got to imagine that we don't realize that we're doing the same thing with our brands. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about advice to the folks here about how they could rethink the idea of the body as a billboard or the brand as a billboard, and how to sort of bring these elements to life?
Well, one thing that a group of researchers and I have been thinking about is if you think of your brand as a person and the attributes as a personality, what are the things that you like about them, both as character traits and also literal mannerisms? And it's funny, you can get a lot more concrete faster than sometimes doing a mission statement or trying to describe a specific brand. And you think of the people you most like, because you're trying to have that brand resonate with the psychodemographic of some of the niche markets that you're reaching out to. So it can be a parallel path. What are some of the traits, the character traits of many of the people we reach out to? What do we want our brand traits to be? How can it be complementary? So that's one thought about it.
You know, actually, one of the things that, as you're saying that, I think about, you know, we talk about emotion a lot here today, but especially online, one of the things that I think is so rampant, especially when we look at anything going viral, and going back to this KitchenAid example we used earlier, the idea that something negative is so powerful and so spreadable and so shareable. What is it about negativity that forces travel that quickly and that extensively? But at the same time, what do you do to spin sort of an offset of positive experiences? Otherwise, I got to imagine that your brand sort of becomes what people feel and what people express. And if we're not thinking about that, it's sort of a dangerous path to be on.
Three thoughts came to mind. One is, I do believe behavior online is somewhat different in person. I do believe we have the capacity to be much more vicious for the anonymity, and there's some studies that research that. So for us to grow up and have the discipline to be aware that even what may be neutral language can appear different to other people is important. Just profoundly, this is a reminder that I don't keep myself enough. Negative happens sooner, faster, longer, and more intensely. It's because of our survival instinct. So one of the most beguiling things, I think, as a counter to that, is when we are attacked or when we've done something wrong, to find the part of that person or that brand that's attacking that we can sincerely like and say, I really appreciate you bringing this up. It's clear that, and you attribute some quality they have that they see in themselves that's admirable. And so we want to clear this up and see if we can reach a middle ground or see if we can respond to your difficulty and help you. But it's direct, positive, specific, and authentic. So it has to be something where you, as a human, you react, but then you pause and say, okay, in light of that, how can I praise someone in the heat of the negativity? So that's one thought I have about it. But I believe we're going to have an increasing issue as we have more things done virtually with the negative heating up faster and spiral. It's much easier to spiral negative than positive.
Yeah, absolutely. I read somewhere, I don't know if this is true, but I read somewhere that it takes somewhere around 12 positive experiences to offset one negative experience. And so if you have, especially in the social web where people are so expressive, and if hearing you where negativity is so easy to share, then if you're not engaging those moments, if you're not engaging those moments productively, and if you're not also intentionally creating positive experiences, then the balance is sort of representative of what the balance is. And so now it sounds to me that as a brand manager or as an executive for anybody within the organization that cares about what people think about the organization, you now have to willfully invest in what these experiences look like,
Yes.
how people are understanding that a negative experience just is an event of frustration, but it now has an influential effect on those around them. So do you see, I mean, I know in the real world, there's that old saying that if one person will tell 20 people if they're really unhappy. And now that people are connected to hundreds or thousands of people, it becomes so much more pronounced and profound. And if people are sort of building this different type of digital self-confidence, if you will, and they're sharing greater senses of negativity, then a proactive strategy that everybody in the room should now think about, I have to imagine, is to invest in now a human experience, not just a human brand, but a human experience that is very contagious in a good way, which, is that possible to design? And is that possible to train against?
It's possible to design to some degree. And I'll go back to some of the great panels I've heard earlier. It's not just how deep the engagement you have, so you have people who step forward. It's how diverse those people are by temperament, background, or whatever, that step forward and say, she meant this, I support this, I think there's a misunderstanding. Because research shows if there's a diverse crowd of evangelists or advocates that step forward, people will back off because they then are afraid it'll affect their reputation. So genuinely having that generosity, as Andrew called it when the cred thing, having generosity of giving and sharing authentically so you're building relationships, I think is going to be really important. And I know that's sort of an indirect answer, and it's also something that doesn't happen overnight. It has to be your attitude. It's not all about me. And I know other people have said that here.
Right.
And then having a conference, I think every business should be thinking of some in-person interactions where they have a conference where the formats facilitate people bonding together around the theme. So they may have a version of speed dating formats, meet the pros and tables of 8, what you're doing up here, having it go live. That mix means we get to find the sweet spots of mutual interest related to your brand and related to other things, but we did it in your conference.
Right.
So I think that's the way you offset the negative over time.
That's wonderful. Mike Edelhart, hopefully you heard that. We just got free advice for next year. Well, Kare, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure and honor to speak with you. Everybody
I
help
enjoyed
me.
it.
Thank you.